What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 190. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. This is going to be a very densely packed news show. I'm sure everybody is going to love it. So go ahead and hit the share button on the show. Hit the like button if you're listening on YouTube or if you found it on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Make sure you put it out there to more people. Do what you can to support the show. Really appreciate that. Of course, the show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and that's where you can find all my work, including the daily news roundup that I write. And you can support the show directly financially at Patreon, Subscribestar, or crypto. All that information is in the show notes page. You can also find the information for our sponsor, Paloma Verde, in the show notes page, and the promo code PEACE, which saves you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. We've had a great year-long partnership with Paloma Verde. They're a fantastic libertarian-owned and run company. I really love that we get to do business with them and to put their products out there to our listeners. And so check out everything they have at Paloma Verde. If you want to get the lab test results right there on the website, they could tell you how CBD could best benefit you with their education page. So check out what they have going on at Paloma Verde. Just use the promo code PEACE when you check out. Save yourself some money and help the show. All right, let's get into it. The first story I have today is a breakdown of an inspector general report, a Pentagon inspector general, and they're looking into sexual assault at the Pentagon. And this article from Task and Purpose is titled, "The Pentagon has said for years that tackling sexual assault is a top priority. A new report shows the opposite." And so what the Inspector General report does, and again, this is the Pentagon investigating itself, and we've discussed on recent shows how with things even as serious as committing war crimes in Afghanistan or Syria, the Inspector Generals are more than willing to go along and cover it up, and it seems that this is the exact case here. The extent of the sexual assault, harassment, rape problem, targeting female service women in the military is extensive. Like the reports and the polling say up to like 50% of female service women say that this has happened to them. And so this is a really serious problem, and it's been known about for well over a decade now. You could go back, and this article does have quotes from several former heads of the Department of Defense saying that, like, hey, we're going to look into this, we're going to address it, we're going to make it a top priority, and that just hasn't been the case. Some of the numbers here find that the DoD essentially has not increased its budget and has not hired more people to deal with domestic assault and sexual abuse in the workplace and to carry out these investigations. These investigations need to be handled in a specific way to empower the victims of the abuse and to make sure that this isn't going to be covered up or that this is going to be handled in a way that they feel uncomfortable with. If it's a case of domestic violence or something like that, there may be kids involved. And so having people who have experience with this is extremely important. And it found in the Army did not assign the correct investigators in 9% of cases, which honestly isn't that extreme. It's not great, but you assume that like in some small percentage this would happen. The Navy is doing poorly, not doing it in 16% of the cases, and the Air Force only 44% of the time they're doing it correctly. 66% of the time they're not assigning the correct investigators to and look into these crimes. They also found that despite requirements and policy, they found that 50% of the time in the Army, 59% of the time in the Navy, 94% of the time in the Air Force, and 11% of the time in the Marine Corps, they did not go through the correct policy. And so obviously, they're really not even trying here. The Pentagon's excuse is that it's a funding issue. It's a resource issue. This is the $800 billion a year agency complaining that they don't have enough money to look into and make sure they're protecting the women that they bring into the service. One of the striking things about this, and something that we've addressed on the show, but is, been just talked about widely, is the Pentagon is constantly trying to recruit more and more women into the military. And hell, we'll talk about later in the show, they're looking to make women register for the draft and put them in an environment where they're obviously so likely to be victimized. This is just absolutely crazy. So, we see from the report from the and Pentagon Inspector General that this is not being addressed. But, to look at it actually through the lens of a servicewoman who has been victimized, we have a Marine who has published an open letter at Task and Purpose titled, "Sir, you know what you did to me," an open letter to the Marine General handling my sexual harassment case. I believe her name is Sybil Greenberg, and I'm not 100% certain if this is like maybe a pseudonym to protect her identity, but it does seem like this is a person, so I'm assuming that this actually did happen to her. She writes, "Last month I was asked to provide you," this is written to the person in the military, the commanding officer who is overseeing her case, and all the details will come out here. You with a written recommendation after my complaint of sexual trauma was substantiated. As this topic is a topic that continues to affect more than 50% of American servicewomen, I've decided to do so in an open letter. I believe our best chance at changing this pervasive culture of abuse is by raising the iron curtain that usually keeps our military and civilian worlds apart and engaging the American public in an honest, transparent conversation. Here is my recommendation. I respectfully request that the Marine officer who continually sexually harassed me over the course of several months not be allowed to remain in the service, let alone hold a command." And so that's the start of her letter. I think it's very strong, and I mean, from my point, that this is her letting him off easy. Obviously, as detailed to come, what he did is on the lines of criminal and should probably face some charges, not just be removed from the service, but dishonorably discharged. That way he doesn't continue to profit off of the American taxpayer dime. She goes on to write that, "I am disappointed by the lack of action taken so far to hold this Marine accountable. Sir, you know what he did to me. You read the 100-page investigation that looked into and confirmed the unwelcome sexual advances, the deliberate and repeated offensive comments, including accusing me of being a high-class escort, the salacious, rampant rumors he started about me that not only harmed my career but also affected the officers of much higher rank, the attempts to control what I wrote and who I spent time with, the frightening alcohol-triggered mood swings, and subsequent escalation between verbal berating and psychopathic praise. Towards the end of our time serving together, he texted, 'I'm very proud to have known someone as extraordinary as you.'" And so this is, just a very abusive kind of thing where, the person is very rude and demean and all that, but then will attempt to build you up and everything. She also writes that, "And yet he turned Camp Barrett into the most hostile workplace that I have ever known. Although my allegations were substantiated by an independent military officer almost 5 months ago, this lieutenant continues to execute his daily duties as an officer and was just recently in charge of an entire platoon of enlisted Marines. So far, you have only issued a page 11 counseling, an administrative document that does a little more than a slap on the wrist for his misconduct. I hope that this update provides you with some closure in that matter," one of the judge advocates overseeing the case recently told the writer of this Marine Greenberg. "Sir, I ask you to reconsider such a mild reprimand in light of the abuse that I suffered. This is what closure, not justice, looks like." She says, "This is not what closure nor justice looks like." Okay. If you want, you can read the rest of the article. She goes in and documents some more of the abuse that's very, common in the military and everything like that. But here you have a case where you have 100-page report finding that this man, took a subordinate and, just made extremely offensive comments to her. But not only that, started salacious rumors about her being escorted. And it sounds like, saying that she was hooking up with higher level officers and all this. I mean, this is really something that's going to hurt and destroy her career and change the way that her coworkers look at her to start this kind of rumor. And that they've let him stay in charge after knowing this for an additional 5 months to potentially continue to abuse and make other victims is extremely disturbing, and just really goes to back up what even the Pentagon's own Inspector General found. And so while the Pentagon says, hey, it's a funding and resource issue and all this, okay, well, let's look. Let's see. The Pentagon is now expected to spend $200 billion, $203 billion to be exact, over the next 30 years for the B-21, the new generation of bomber the U.S. is building. This project has been going on for a few years now, but this is the first time we're getting a real public estimate from the Air Force on the price, and they expect to purchase 100 of these aircraft, but they're not in service yet. And so, that $200 billion goes now, and that they're starting spending and all of that. They estimate that the planes are going to cost $639 million each, and all these estimates, I believe, are 2019 dollars, and that $25 billion of the money is going to be in development, and $64 billion to build production. I really don't understand why the Pentagon is paying, I believe, Northrop Grumman all this money to develop and have production for the plane, and then also to continue to pay them for maintenance of the plane, all that. If the Pentagon is going to pay for the development and the production of the plane, then the Pentagon should just own the whole process. This is essentially just allowing privatization of some of our taxpayer dollars to corrupt officials who will give themselves massive bonuses. This is the kind and make sure that a lot of this money gets funneled into the media and think tanks to ensure producing reports that demand more warfare, more drones, and all of that. Also in this report, it details that the Air Force Secretary, Frank Kendall, cannot have a real role in the development of this plane because he was formerly involved and a representative, a lobbyist, I believe, for Northrop Grumman. And so this is absolutely unbelievable. You think it would be something that would absolutely disqualify him as a pick. This is, I believe, the biggest dollar ticket item that the Air Force currently has, and the head of the Air Force cannot oversee it because he was formerly working with the company. Not only that, it's all these conflicts of interest, right? Like if you're this guy's number two, that you're only in charge of this right now because your former boss worked for Northrop Grumman. And so, if you're doing things to benefit Northrop Grumman to give them more money, then, likely you're going to see some kickbacks and favorability from your boss, because we know how corrupt and the revolving door and all this works in Washington and the Pentagon. And so I'm sure this plane is going to cost the American taxpayers a hell of a lot more than $200 billion, but we are getting some initial estimates at this point. And one thing I'll point out is one of the reasons that the Air Force is saying this now is to make sure that people aren't surprised later on when we find out how much this plane cost. So when it costs a lot more, they're gonna be like, yeah, but it's only up, a couple $100 million from the initial estimate or something like that to try to minimize it. Also talking about how the Pentagon wastes money, there's this report from Task and Purpose, and I'm convinced we only know the truth is because they figured out a solution. But the title of this article is How One Airman Fits the Air Force's Night Vision Problem with a 4-cent chunk of plastic. What actually happened here is the Air Force bought a bunch of advanced night vision goggles that also had thermal and all this other stuff, and they paid $19,000 a piece for them. I didn't actually find how many they bought, but at least for an entire unit, they have all these night vision goggles. Well, guess what? The Air Force has to continue to use the old ones because these can't mount to the Air Force helmets, and they don't have the new helmets coming anytime soon. And so eventually, some, very ambitious airman figures out how to, I guess, like kind of 3D print and engineer a piece of plastic that will clip these two things together. But if not for that, the Air Force was basically just fine with wasting tens of thousands of dollars on this equipment. And look, I formerly worked in like a social work type job. I know how much people get paid who are like, domestic abuse, like counselors and stuff like that. What the Pentagon, we're talking just a few of these infrared units that would, make up for some of the positions that are drastically lacking at the Pentagon. As in 2011, they had 2,640 reports of sexual assault or harassment in the workplace, and that number in 2019 was 5,699, and they haven't hired any new people to deal with that amount of cases in that time. Maybe if they're buying a little, some fewer bombers, they could actually protect the women that they claim to care about so much and why I'm on their range so badly. We have General Atomics announced they're building a new drone. They were recently testing this, and one of the very important things about this drone is that it has a payload a lot larger than the other U.S. armed drones. I believe the Reaper could carry 4 Hellfire missiles, and I think it's the Predator or the Gray Eagle that could carry 8. This would be able to carry 16, so this is a much larger load that this would be able to carry. And also wonder what other kind of technology that they're putting upgrades and advancement on in this new drone that they're developing. No idea how much it's going to cost yet, who's going to buy it, but this is some of the first reporting we're getting about this drone. We have the announcement that the Pentagon has failed its 4th audit. It's never passed an audit, so it's only had 4 audits, and it's failed every single one of them. The Pentagon insists that they're making good progress, although the audits only covered 37% of the assets of the Pentagon, and only 6 of the audits of the 26 different audits for the Pentagon actually passed. And so even though they're only looking at a small fraction, about a third of the Pentagon's spending, the Pentagon's assets, they're still not able to pass in a large number of the audits. And so this is incredibly discouraging, despite what the Pentagon is going to tell you, which is, hey, we're making good progress, we're getting closer here. Just think of how many billions of dollars are being stolen from the American taxpayer every year. We let the Pentagon go on with this lack of oversight. Something else important here is that the Pentagon is only estimating that they're going to be able to pass an audit by 2027. There was a recent bill that was introduced, I believe, in the Senate, not the House, that would take 1% of the Pentagon's budget every year that they were unable to pass an audit after next year. Now, this won't pass, and we're talking about like $8 billion, which, as you'll see when we're talking about the NDAA, the Pentagon funding bill, in a moment, is probably meaningless chump change really to the Pentagon, and they'll throw a fit and probably get that money through like a slush fund or something else. But anyways, the Pentagon won't be able to make that, so I don't even expect that legislation to pass. Of the 26 audits that they actually conducted, 2 are not completed yet, 6 passed, 1 failed, and 27 they rendered no opinion, which means that it would have failed, I guess, is like getting an incomplete in a class rather than taking an F or something like that. I'm not an accountant. I don't know all the technical phrases and everything exactly what they mean. Overall, this audit costs the taxpayer $200 million. And again, it's just absolutely insulting and a slap in the face that they're going to get $200 million to conduct an audit, and they're not even looking at a fraction of half of their assets. Absolutely absurd. So we have some statements from the Pentagon on the strike in Syria that was recently uncovered and reported on by the New York Times. clear war crimes. We had high ranking military officials attempt to get some kind of justice, some kind of investigation into those war crimes, and were just consistently ignored. All that's laid out in the New York Times piece, which I covered on Monday's show with Patrick McFarlane. But here, the Pentagon is addressing and apologizing for an aspect of that strike. However, it's not what you think. They're saying they're apologizing because they misreported what kind of weapons were used in the strike. Initially, they reported it was a 500-pound bomb and then 2 1,000-pound bombs. And what they now say are they were all three 500-pound bombs, just different variants of 500-pound bombs. Now, to use the word apologize with this is incredibly insulting. Say that we have to make a clarification or something like that. It's absolutely meaningless, of course, whether the people were vaporized by a 2,000-pound bomb or just blown in half by a 500-pound bomb makes relatively little difference to the children that were killed and the families that lost their children, their wives, their loved ones, and stuff like this. It doesn't seem like as of yet the Pentagon is really interested in doing anything about this. We have our Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin being asked to be briefed on those strikes, and while it's nice that maybe he's taking a mild interest in this, look, you've had two situations in the past couple of months, but that have come out about CENTCOM, I believe all while under the direction of General Kenneth McKenzie. All this has been done while General Mark Milley was the head of the Joint Chiefs. You have to start at the top and you have to start firing people if you're Lloyd Austin. And if you're Biden, you really need to be looking at Lloyd Austin too. But none of this is happening. No heads are going to roll. Nobody is going to be charged for war crimes that left scores of women and children dead. Absolutely the most horrific thing that could happen. And they didn't even bother to investigate, even though it was reported, well documented on video at high levels. Austin did make some statements about the airstrike, but he just said we must work harder to, make sure this doesn't happen. We're really dedicated to making sure this doesn't happen again. All empty words, all empty gestures, and suggests to me that the Pentagon really doesn't plan to do anything about this, and it's just looking to sweep it under the rug. Made some platitudes, hold an investigation, and then say, what, we found out we need to change like this one policy, but everything else is fine. All right, next up here, I want to talk about the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. This is the Pentagon funding bill. It's topping out at, I think, $780 billion something right now. It's already passed the House, and now it's going to come up in the Senate. So this, Dave DeCamp explains at antiwar.com that early in the week they were reporting that the vote was going to happen this week. And then when Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer brought it to the floor, he not only included the already massive $778 billion bill, but also the $250 China Competition Act bill. And this is all funding $52 billion in subsidies for U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, and $195 billion to fund research and development was in that bill. And the Republicans were unhappy about this, not because it was too much spending or because they wanted this really to be separate, they don't want it to pass or something like that, but that Chuck Schumer had threatened to change or had actually changed some of the language in the bill. So I actually kind of understand why the Republicans are upset about that. It seems like somewhat of a shifty thing to do, to have a bill and then change it where you have a situation, you agree to a bill, right, and you're going to vote on it, but then you include it in something else and you keep the name of the bill, but you change the language. That doesn't seem like a quite right thing to do. It seems kind of on the nefarious end, and like Chuck Schumer's really just trying to get his way on some specific language here, maybe some Senate trickery. I'm sure the Republicans do it too. I don't think this is like a unique quality of Chuck Schumer. I'm sure Mitch McConnell or whoever the hell else would would be in that position would do something very similar. But that was the Republicans' main issue, not all the spending in the bill. This does currently include a provision that matches the House version of the bill to include women and force them to sign up for the draft. As I've argued on the show, it's completely cowardly of Congress to include this in the NDAA and not pass this in separate legislation, but also it's just a backwards policy and the absolute opposite that you want of wokeness, when really what you're shooting for is equality where men also don't have to register for the draft, but they're pretending like this is some kind of equality bill where they're now going to require women to register for the draft and possibly be conscripted to go kill in the military. Now, I don't stand with all the arguments that the Republicans are making. I know, some of the things that they're saying are like, well, women are weak and shouldn't be in the military or something like that. That's obviously ridiculous or and I don't agree with that. But I don't think that women should be conscripted and we should get rid of the draft entirely. And this makes it harder to get rid of the draft for men, which is, what I want to do. Because it doesn't exist yet for women, and if you include it to everyone, then it takes away one of the main arguments against the draft, and one of the reasons that Congress is actually moving now to do it is because men's rights groups are suing and saying it was discriminatory, which it absolutely is. So they're trying to fix the discriminatory problem by making it terrible for everyone. So Josh Hawley, to just get into the details of it, is bringing up an amendment to try to strip that back out of the bill. Even if it does get stripped out of the Senate version, it's not exactly clear what will happen when conference committee happens and they withdraw it up, since it was in the House bill. My guess kind of is that they would end up including it. We have a senator, I believe from Alabama or Mississippi, pushing to include another $25 billion in the NDAA, which of course would put it over $800 billion. This would be for more shipyards. And the bill is from Rob Whitman and Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi, and then from Virginia, that are behind this bill, pushing this bill. And it would be, I think, 21 billion that is for public shipyards, and then the rest going to private shipyards. So that's really all I have on the NDAA as it comes up. There's just one last story I want to mention. And this, for people who aren't watching, I have an article up here from The Hill. It's their national security newsletter, I believe. And I think the name of the newsletter is actually Overnight Defense and National Security. And then they have presented by Boeing, senators to take up defense bill Wednesday. But the way it's written, it looks like a headline where right in the middle of the headline about the defense bill that they're writing at the Hill, they have that this is presented by Boeing, which of course is one of the companies that gets the most money from the Pentagon. It just goes to show how skewed the reporting is obviously going to be. It was absolutely disgusting that all these media outlets allow themselves to take so much money from the military industrial complex and just shove it right in everybody's face. One last thing on the Senate, we have Rand Paul attempting, and he's going to try to block the recent arms sale that was announced to Saudi Arabia. This is $650 million in air-to-air missiles that the Biden administration has tried to write off as a defensive arms sale, when it's absolutely not, and that these weapons could be used in Yemen to kill people, and a real concern. And so good for Rand Paul for standing up here. If you want to read the details about it, Kelly Vallejos has a nice write-up at the Quincy Institute, but I'll just go through and say it's still early, and once we see what congressmen are signing on or not, I'll talk about it in far more detail. But this is a very important move. All right, a few stories on COVID here. The first one has to do with the Oklahoma National Guard, where the governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, I guess Stitt, removed the guy who was the adjunct commander of the Oklahoma National Guard, and then which is well within the governor's power and all that, and then appointed Brigadier General Thomas Mancino to be the head of Oklahoma's National Guard, who then issued a press statement saying that the Oklahoma National Guard would be receptive to exemptions on medical or religious basis for people who don't want to get the vaccine, and that they wouldn't be enforcing the federal Pentagon level vaccine mandate. So, getting into the details of it, it does appear that the decision was made by the governor because of the COVID issue. Initially it wasn't clear, and I don't think there's been a public statement to say that it was the COVID issue, but there's been reporting from inside of the governor's administration suggesting that his issue with with the former head of the Oklahoma National Guard was that he wanted to encourage the mandate and to say that the Pentagon's mandate was legal and stood and everything like that. So this is the situation in Oklahoma. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play out. It may have some interesting implications legally for, say, the Defend the Guard movement as to who really has control over the National Guard. And, feel how you feel about this particular COVID mandate and whether they're going to enforce it or not. The Pentagon not having control over the National Guard, I think, is a good thing. The U.S. has promised to deliver millions of Johnson & Johnson vaccinations to the border of Thailand and Myanmar as a part of the program that the U.S. said it was participating in to deliver vaccines to war-stricken areas. This is the International COVAX program that the U.S. is going to be donating these vaccines through. COVAX, all capitals there. And these particular vaccines that the U.S. is donating are a group of Johnson & Johnson vaccines that have been sitting in a warehouse for several months when the manufacturer of the vaccine thought that they or had actually botched doses of it, and they weren't sure if these were good or not. And then over the last several months, the FDA has gone through, tested all these vaccines, and I guess confirmed, at least reasonably, that they were okay and cleared them for use. And so these are the vaccines that the U.S. is sending. There is maybe something a little bit uncomfortable with that, but at the same time, what are you gonna do? Let them go to waste. Now, I will say, and something that I've discussed quite a bit, is I feel like the U.S. has continued to put these vaccines in areas mainly to counter China, and that this is more of a PR move than actual looking to help the world poor. There's a lot of countries that have done far worse in response to COVID than these Southeast Asian countries, and countries with lower vaccination rates already, and with their more vulnerable populations still at risk of COVID. Also, you have examples of lots of refugees pouring from Afghanistan to Iran, and COVAX is helping with those. And while those refugees are definitely definitely a result of the American 20-year war there, and those refugees I think are ones that the U.S. maybe has more of a obligation to really support and help. The U.S. won't do it, of course, because then it would be going through Iran. And I believe those COVID vaccines are coming through different countries. Now, the U.S. will also donate 1 million Moderna shots to Vietnam. This is a country, again, that has a relatively high vaccination rate. I think like 50% of the population, or at least of the the population that's available to receive the COVID vaccine in Vietnam does have it. And so it's interesting that the U.S. is again targeting countries that's maybe looking to sway over to our direction on the China issue rather than the countries that need the vaccine the most. The Navy made a statement on unvaccinated sailors saying that they would be dismissed. The deadline to get your vaccination in the Navy is November 28th. You had to be fully vaccinated by then, and I believe that means like even if you were vaccinated today, you wouldn't be considered fully vaccinated for a whole 2 weeks, and so you wouldn't hit that deadline. Now I'm sure the Navy will not be kicking out people who would be fully vaccinated in like 2 days. They just didn't get the shot early enough or something like that. And my guess is that they're going to make a couple threats and really push people to get the vaccine. But we do find out some information in this article I have here about generally how vaccinated the military branches are. We're seeing that I believe Navy has a 99%, at least what they're reporting, percent of people who have gotten at least one vaccination. In the Air Force, that would be 97%, Army 95%, and then 94% in the Marines. Now, my guess is that these are people who are fully vaccinated, so we either have one dose of the Johnson and Johnson, although they describe it in the article as having at least one dose. So I'm not exactly sure. Maybe that they are just saying one dose, and like the other 5% or so, most of the people actually have taken the Johnson and Johnson and would be considered fully vaccinated. The Air Force says that 10,000 are unvaccinated, and most are seeking exemptions. 800 exemptions have been refused, and 1,800 have been granted so far. If you have your exemption refused by the Navy, they will only give you 5 days to then get your first dose of the vaccination. All right, that is what I have on that story. We now have this very interesting article from Axios. The White House is looking to spend billions of dollars to ramp up the production of COVID-19 vaccinations to at least 1 billion doses per year. I think that at least is important there. And then 1 billion, of course, is an interesting number since there are only, like a third of 1 billion total population in America. So this would, be enough for 3 doses a year for Americans, although, to be fair, they may plan to be exporting some of these. The fact that, again, they're doing 1 billion doses a year, I think suggests that they are planning on having people take these vaccinations at least once a year, if not more. Although, again, that is just, my speculation. Maybe they do plan on exporting all of these. But it does seem to be at least an annual thing. Also note that this is just for the mRNA vaccinations. They are not looking to increase the production capabilities of, say, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or the Novavax, which is potentially going to be approved soon and is a more standard version of a COVID vaccine. We have AstraZeneca announcing that they will begin taking profits from the AstraZeneca vaccine. This one is not approved in the U.S. and so really doesn't hit us here in the U.S., but it is interesting that, you have all these companies who are so heavily, their vaccines so heavily funded on the taxpayer dollar, are now making so much money on the taxpayer handing these out. Interesting statement from Anthony Fauci, and this I think goes and adds to why I think that more vaccinations are coming. Fauci is saying that we're starting to see an uptick, and I want to make sure I quote him exactly here. What we're starting to see now is an uptick in hospitalizations among people who have been vaccinated but not boosted. It's a significant proportion, but not the majority by any means. So again, that's Dr. Fauci, what he's saying, this isn't from Kyle Anzalone at all, saying that, people need now to be boosted. And one of the reasons that I think this is significant is we're starting to see several European countries say that fully vaccinated means 3 COVID doses. Now, it's interesting that they're, all counting this and starting to really phrase this as 2 or 3 vaccines and not 1 or 2, and because like if you take the Johnson and Johnson, exactly how long do you have to wait before you then need a booster, and can you take that less often or something like that. A lot of questions about all this, also mixing vaccinations and stuff like that, because I don't believe the booster has been approved for even emergency use for anyone but Pfizer in the United States at this point. So lots of interesting questions about the vaccine, what's going to happen. I'm not, giving any kind of medical analysis here. I'm just talking about policy and what's going on for Americans and what kind of regulation and what we had to deal with from our government regarding the vaccine. Now, Moderna is seeking approval for the vaccination and or to get boosters for the vaccination. I'm not sure when this is going to come for Pfizer and how long it would take for the FDA to give the emergency approval for the third Moderna vaccination. Now, one interesting thing on the three vaccinations I want to point out, again, I've been saying this from the beginning, that, if you want to be considered fully vaccinated, that means now taking 2 shots and a booster, essentially. That's 3 shots. And while they say that the Pfizer vaccine has full FDA approval, that is only for the first 2 doses. And so I feel like there was a real bait and switch done there with how that was done. They really haven't given full approval to these vaccines yet, or even to the Pfizer one yet. Now, along with vaccines, they're also developing pills, and Pfizer is now seeking emergency use authorization for their COVID-19 antiviral pill. Merck has also developed one of these pills. I'm not sure where that pill is particularly at, where it's being used and everything like that, but it starts to raise the question of how important that these vaccine mandates actually are, if there is a pill that could help to, according to Pfizer, they are saying reduce the chance of hospitalization or death by like up to 89%. So I think it really calls into question like how rigid we have to be with the vaccines if there's other ways to handle COVID and to give people other options. Just a few more stories on COVID here. Real quick on the COVID pills, actually. The U.S. is planning to buy enough of the Pfizer pills to treat 10 million people, and they will spend over $5 billion on that medication. So another big payday for Pfizer. Want to mention that Pfizer and Merck did agree to share the recipe for the COVID antiviral pill through licensing agreements. I don't want to give them too much credit. I think you'll really have to look at the letter of the licensing agreement to see how much these companies plan to profit still off of other people making the drugs, but they are apparently going to let lower income countries make these drugs, so it could help to, curb any kind of COVID deaths that you have in countries where there's very low to almost no vaccination happening at this point. Um, Let's see. There were 2 million Allume at-home COVID tests that were recently recalled due to false positives. And then this very interesting story from NBC News looking into what companies are getting their PPP loans forgiven. These were the loans that were given out early in the COVID days through the federal government, basically saying like you meet payroll and everything like that. We're giving you all this money. Well, a lot of companies did very well through the pandemic. They didn't suffer whatsoever or had a lot of money in the first place, still took these loans and are still getting these loans forgiven. At least $120 million from companies who did better during the pandemic than pre-pandemic have had loans forgiven by the federal government. This is very disturbing corruption and just taxpayer dollars being stolen. Hundreds of millions we're talking about at this point. All right, Joe Biden had talks with Chinese President Xi over the weekend. This was a big deal, although not much came from this whatsoever. We did have the two agreeing to have arms talks, which is a good thing, although there's no sign that this is actually going to come of anything. And China has been pretty clear in the past that unless the U.S. is talking about, making their arsenal smaller, China's not going to do the same, because China's arsenal is like 5% of what the U.S. Nuclear weapons arsenal is, and the U.S. has far more nuclear kind of technology, and also we're spending $2 billion currently to wrap up our nuclear technology. And so, like I said, I don't see anything coming out of these talks. The meeting between Biden and Xi apparently was 3 hours long, and so hopefully at least there was a good amount of understanding of each other's positions put forward. Another small but somewhat important development from the talks was that the U.S. and China agreed to ease restrictions on each other's journalists. This was going to allow Chinese journalists to get a full year visa to come to the United States rather than the current 90-day visa that they're currently limited to. And China will allow reporters from the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and New York Times back into China. So while Biden and Xi, had these talks, which was absolutely great, could be diplomacy moving in the right direction, the U.S. quickly followed that up by signaling more support for Taiwan, and this is going to be something that's going to deteriorate the U.S. and Chinese relationship. The U.S. had higher level than usual talks with Taiwan. This, doesn't mean that Joe Biden is meeting with the Taiwanese president, but the U.S. and Taiwan really aren't supposed to have deep foreign relations. And so the Taiwanese deputy defense minister, deputy foreign minister, and national security deputy was going to meet with U.S. State Department secretaries. These are relatively important meetings. Eli Ratner is going to meet involved here, and he's a part of the Pentagon's special China advisory. And so, these kind of means are very important, and China is going to be unhappy and see it as the U.S. not being really interested in any of the diplomacy it talked about at the Biden-Xi summit. The U.S. also began anti-submarine drills with Japan in the South China Sea following the talks, another signal to China that the U.S. really isn't interested in any diplomacy. And we have Taiwan announcing their first advanced F-16 squadron is being deployed. They have a lot of old F-16 that they're upgrading, and then they're buying some new ones. These F-16Vs that Taiwan is now deploying are some of the most advanced warfighters in the world. Short of, I think, like the F-22, it's one of the best planes that the U.S. puts out there. And so China is going to be concerned and see this as a threat. And of course, know that American military-industrial complex is making a lot of money, and this is buying Taiwan an awful lot of goodwill in the United States that I'm sure they will use to ramp up anti-China propaganda. There is a congressional advisory board that meets on China, and members of this board include people from Heritage and the Hudson Institute, and so you could expect they're going to put out a hawkish report, and they absolutely did. This particular report that they put out called for Washington to take a tougher stance on Taiwan, not meaning, hey, Taiwan, we have this one China policy, and so we have to be careful. They're calling for the United States to appropriate more funds for Taiwan to buy U.S.-made weapons and things like that. Of course, think tanks funded by the military-industrial complex advocating for policies that benefit the military-industrial complex. We have Australia saying that it would be inconceivable that they wouldn't join a fence of Taiwan with the United States. Now, whether the U.S. would actually defend Taiwan if China invaded is, another story. But this is a signal from Australia, I think, that they want to be more involved in the U.S. actions countering China, like the AUKUS Treaty, and see an important place in the, U.S. empire sphere. We have Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting with the Chinese delegation and again committing the United States to defend the Senkaku Islands that are also claimed by China and Taiwan. The U.S. is willing to defend these for China with military force. It's a very disturbing claim, but the U.S. has made it through several administrations. Now, the U.S., while meeting with Japan, also it was going to have a joint press conference with Japan and South Korea. However, a South Korean and Japanese territorial dispute over shared islands has caused both of those delegations to actually miss the press conference, and the U.S. was just left standing there by itself without its allies. And, maybe there's a very important visual to think about there, where you have U.S. allies who, will say we'll defend your territories, but then they can't even attend a press conference with us over their own disputes. All right, everybody, that's where I'll wrap up the show for today. Hope you all enjoyed the show. Please continue to share it and put that out there to more people. Libertarianinstitute.org, antiwar.com. Check out the viewpoints and donate to the show if you can. Buy your CBD at Paloma Verde. Thanks, everyone.